Personnel Committee of May 19th to order. And the first order of business is the election of a chairperson. Are there any nominations?
Yes, I would nominate Ed Wagner from the 5th District.
Alderperson Hendler nominated Alderperson Wagner. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? There be no further nominations. I declare the nomination closed, and I'll look for a motion to elect Alderperson Wagner as chairperson. Motion by Hendler. Do I have a second? Rebecca? Motion by Hendler, second by Spiros. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. Congratulations, Mr. Wagner.
Thank you.
Your meeting, huh?
Let me know when you're ready to move on, Deb.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the election of a vice chairperson, and the floor is open for nominations. But Mr. Hendler.
I would nominate Rebecca Spiros.
Is there a second? There being no second, I'll entertain a motion to there being no other nominations, I'll entertain a motion to close nominations and cast unanimous ballot for Ms. Spiros. Motion by Hendler, second by anybody? Oh, Rebecca. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thanks. Okay. And the next thing is identification of potential conflicts of interest. Looking at the agenda tonight, is there anything on the agenda that anyone feels they might need to recuse themselves for? Seeing none, we'll move on to citizen comments. Or do we have any citizen comments?
I have not received any, and I directed through the agenda that they be sent to me in advance, and there have been none to my knowledge.
Okay, do we have any on the phone lines either, or we're not doing the phone lines tonight? Okay.
No, we only do the phone lines for a council. It has to be in person or in advance by email or mail.
Okay, thank you. So we have no citizen comments. That'll bring us to the consent agenda, which is the minutes of the March 3rd, 2020 meeting, bills and payroll, February Treasury report, March Treasury report, report of personnel actions, monthly position control report. What's your wish? What's your pleasure?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
It's a motion. Is there a second? I think that Mr. Wetzel's got his hand up first. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, they say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And there are no items removed from the consent agenda. Therefore, we'll move to item 8, which is the request to recommend the approval of an amendment to the city's 2020 fee schedule for short-term rentals, hotel, motel, and comprehensive plan amendments, presented by Josh Miller.
Thank you, Chairperson Wagner. Typically, we try to approve a fee schedule in the fall for the following year. We have had a couple changes in the code that kind of necessitate adding fees to our fee schedule. The previous one was our plumbing code, and we had to provide some additional, like a plan review fee that was incorporated into our fee schedule. That was just done in, I think, March or April. The most recent changes to our code include the amendment to allow for short-term rentals. That proposed fee is a $10 annual fee for potential short-term rental applicants. In addition to that, we looked at other parts of the code and said, identified areas where we should just address some additional fee amendments rather than doing this again. Hopefully we don't have any more of these, but you never know. There's a hotel motel room tax permit fee that is currently in, I believe, Chapter 4 of the municipal code. It's listed as $10 in the municipal code. We'd like to bring it into the fee schedule. Eventually we'll look to amend the code probably and remove that. So then we'd like to house all of our fees in the fee schedule, but that fee already does exist in the code, but we wanted to bring it into the fee schedule. The other fee that we'd be looking to add is a fee for a comprehensive plan amendment. Right now, we don't have that, and typically that is brought forward by staff, or has been historically. We have had a couple of recent requests, and we realized that was a gap in our fee schedule. So we have two proposed fees for that. One is a $250 fee for a text amendment. These do take a lot of staff time, and a text amendment also requires a public hearing, but doesn't take as much, it's not as expensive to publish a notice because it's smaller. Where it does get kind of expensive is if you have to publish a map. When someone proposes to make a change to the future land use map, let's say, or other mapping items in the plan, those do cost more to publish because you have to publish a display and it's a map. So we would propose a $400 fee for that. We also talked to Public Works, and they're adding a $5 overweight fee for oversized loads for a single permit. That was a pretty minor change. They do have other daily permits and multiple trip permits for that, which are more expensive typically, but they wanted to provide another fee option for just a single trip, single load fee. So those are the fees. Real quick recap, we have one fee for the short-term rentals, which is $10, another fee for the hotel motel room tax permit fee of $10, another fee for a comprehensive plan amendment for $250 for a text amendment, and then a $400 fee if you include a map. And I didn't mention before, but looking at other communities, the comprehensive plan amendment cost ranges from $350 to $700 or $750 in other communities. So we're still on the low side, which I think we like to keep, to be. And then the final change to the fee schedule would be a $5 overweight fee under the Public Works. So with that, we would request to approve the proposed changes to the fee schedule and ask that you direct staff to prepare a resolution for council consideration.
The chair will entertain any motions now. And once we get a motion on the floor, we can go into discussion. Mr. Wetzel, motion to approve. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Paschal. Discussion. Mr. Wetzel.
I guess for clarification, on page 4 of the red letter, which is actually on page 49 of the packet, the driveway grade was changed to sidewalk grade. Could you explain that? Because that seems like a pretty drastic change from a driveway to a sidewalk.
It was just a terminology change that the Public Works Department had requested. There was a couple other little things, changing erosion control. I guess I didn't touch on that too much, but basically the intent was always whenever there's a new driveway installed and an access onto a street, they have to do a sidewalk grade estimate, or not estimate, but they have to establish the grade. So in case they do put a sidewalk in, that grade is matching with where a future sidewalk would go. And so that's really what the intent of that permit is. We do have another driveway access permit. So it was just clarification that there is no driveway grade permit. It's a sidewalk grade. It was just the wrong terminology.
But it is directly related to driveways.
It would be, yes. Right. Yep.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any questions? If not, are you ready to vote? If you're ready for the question, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So carried.
Thank you.
Okay, what do we got next here? Hard part, the scrolling through the thing is a little time taking. So, okay, just bear with me one moment. Deb, you want these back? Oh, thank you for the printed copy. Okay, next up is the number 9, request to recommend approval of, to submit a proposed new part-time position within the Parks and Recreation Department to the city's compensation consultant for pay grade placement, presented by Jen Reku. Jen, this is you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Justin Casperson, our Parks and Rec Director, recently brought forward a request to create a new part-time position in the Parks and Rec Department. It would be titled Recreation Specialist. This position would basically help our recreation manager in providing recreation programs, whether that be programs such as basketball, volleyball, youth baseball, maybe arts and crafts, and many others. This position would report directly to the recreation manager. Justin estimates that this position would he scheduled approximately 1,285 hours per year, which is a 0.6 FTE. It would work more hours, 32.5 hours per week between May and August, and then 20 hours per week for the remainder of the year. The position would be eligible for limited benefits that would include paid holidays, paid vacation. It would be sick leave, participation in the Wisconsin Retirement Program, and life insurance if they choose to accept it. The position would be non-exempt. As you may recall, in the past, when we put together the compensation scale with McGrath Human Resources Group, they have agreed to do our compensation evaluations for a fee of $130 per evaluation. So at this point, really what we are requesting is that this position can be submitted to McGrath for our compensation review. If it is approved to go through from that scenario, we would bring the request back to this committee before implementation would occur. From a budgetary standpoint, this is expected to be offset by limiting other positions that the Park and Rec Department typically hires. So Justin Casperson is also on the call. He is able to take questions. The draft job description is included in your review. And with that, staff is seeking approval to submit the draft job description to McGrath Human Resources Group for compensation evaluation and pay grade placement.
What's your wishes? Do you want to make a motion or do you want to discuss it first?
I'd like to discuss.
Gotcha. I do have one question that just pops into my head very quickly here. Is this was a position that was not budgeted in 2019 for 2020? You did not budget for this at that time? So this is some kind of a structural change within the department? And I guess that goes to Mr. Casperson.
Yes, Mr. Wagner, your question is correct. It wasn't budgeted. We had vacancies now in those positions. We had two individuals, I guess, leave our department since the budget was prepared and approved. So currently we have a number of vacancies open. That's why we're doing it. So no one's going to be losing their job with this transition.
I guess what I'm getting at is this sounds like some kind of a structural change in the administration of recreation programs. Am I correct in assuming that?
Correct, yes.
And why are you doing that?
Because there's currently vacancies.
Because of the vacancies? Only because of the vacancies?
Because there's also a demand for it and vacancies.
Justin, if I can jump in for a second, this is Steve.
Mr. Barr.
You also, I'm sorry, Chairperson?
Yeah, I'd like Ms. Spiros first, then I'll get you, okay?
I'm so sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Becky, please. Rebecca, sorry.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Casperson, this question is for you. Can you tell me what positions are vacant? What the titles of those positions were and how many FTEs those were?
Currently, we have a program instructor that's vacant, an aging and senior center program supervisor, and a recreation program supervisor, and a casual temporary clerk. As for FTEs, those hours that are budgeted is 2,121 hours.
Are all those are all those positions you mentioned vacant?
Correct. Some of them are seasonal, meaning they're only for the summer. We'd only hire them for the summer. So obviously they start in May and then they're done in August. Some are more permanent.
I'm sorry, Mr. Barg, you're next, please.
Thank you, and I apologize before. I'm still getting used to this at some point. But Justin, when you and I talked about this earlier, when you were first presenting this, your idea was that you want to get some consistency. In other words, by getting a part-time position of a little bit more substance, even though it's effectively budget neutral, you're hoping to have somebody who will be a good person that will stay, right?
That's correct. I mean, essentially, we have a revolving door in which we have individuals coming and going by seasons and by whenever they want to come and leave. We think mostly it's not consistent hours and it's not high enough pay. So we've tried to massage it as much as we can, but we have had an opportunity where we had two vacancies available and we didn't hire someone for the summer because we weren't at that point yet. This process started in February and got to Steve and Jen in March, and then obviously COVID hit and everything kind of took a back burner. That's why it's coming to you actually pretty late in the process in May, because we would already have someone for the summer hired. we haven't had the pressure to hire a senior program coordinator because our senior center has been closed for this entire time. So as we try to reopen things and get things moving in the right direction, we thought it'd be important to get this back on the table and get it discussed in front of this body.
Mr. Wetzel.
I guess for clarification, if I understand correctly, this position is to be budgeted by utilizing monies that are not being spent on currently open positions. Is this position actually replacing open positions? Or are we looking at a situation where this position is created, hired, and then down the road, those open positions also get filled? It seems to me like some of the description in the job summary here kind of relate to or would replace some of those open positions. And I guess I'd like to know for certain, is this a replacement of other positions, or is this an additional, in which case we may end up with higher staffing than we've had in the past?
This would be a replacement, and there'd be no additional staffing hours allocated to this. So this would be just a replacement.
So it would be replacing other positions?
Correct.
Any further discussion?
Rebecca?
We need a motion, right?
Rebecca's waving at you.
Excuse me?
Spiros is
Oh,
waving
I'm
at you.
sorry, Rebecca, I've got to get used to looking at the screen. Go ahead, please.
Again, for Justin, so you said some of the positions you did not fill were seasonal and some were not. Can you, and I thought you named off 4 positions. So how many of those 4 were seasonal?
Well, they're all scheduled to be seasonal. So all of our, unless you're either full-time, permanent part-time, or seasonal positions in our compensation schedule. So these positions that I referred to are all seasonal positions.
Okay.
I know that's about as clear as mud.
Yeah, that's not very clear, but I'm okay.
Mr. Wetzel.
So you said one of the positions that's open is the senior coordinator,
Correct.
and that was a seasonal position?
Correct.
He said.
Wow. That's odd.
Is there any other discussion or any questions you need answered before you make a motion? If not, I'll entertain a motion from the floor. Mr. Wetzel.
I'll move to approve with the understanding that this is replacing positions that we're not adding staff to the department.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Paschal seconds. Any further discussion? If not, can we have a roll, do we need a roll call vote, Deb?
Or you could just do a voice.
I can't hear.
I'm sorry,
Voice?
you could do a voice vote.
Okay, so will you go with a voice vote? All those in favor of the motion to approve the sending this on for classification? And this will, my understanding is that will come back to this committee after the classification and the pay grade is established. That's correct? Okay, I see a lot of heads shaking. Okay, so we'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No?
No.
No. Could I see a show of hands? All in favor, aye? One, okay, that Mr. Paschal, Mr. Wetzel? That's 2. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3. The motion fails.
Who was, Mr. Hendler, did you vote no?
Mr. Hendler, Ms. Spiros, and Mr.
Thank
Wagner.
you.
Yeah. Okay, next up is the request to recommend approval of the 2020 compensation scale effective July 1, 2020, presented by Jen Reku again. Jane, go ahead. Jan. Sorry.
Thank you. So again, we're bringing forward the next, this upcoming year's 2020 compensation scale. As you may recall, McGrath put our scale in 2018, and the policy it falls under is policy 3.800. What was approved this past year with the budget approval process was a 1% increase. So the way that works is the 1% is applied to the midpoint of the compensation scale, and the percentages are worked through to adjust the scale for 2020. The scale is included in your packet, so we're not looking for additional funding. This is the same request that was brought forward during the budget time. The compensation scale is attached. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions. But what we are looking for is your approval of payroll resolution 2020-16, providing a 1% compensation plan increase effective July 1st, 2020, and the subsequent salary adjustments for any non-represented staff.
Moved by Mr. Paschal, second by? One more time, motion by Mr. Paschal, second by? The motion dies for lack of a second. Do I have an alternative motion? There being none, I would say that they don't want to go along with it, Jen. So I think,
Is there a chance for discussion?
what is there? I think I'd like to have something on the floor to discuss, either for or against. So,
Well, I would second his motion.
okay, if Mr. Paschal will restate the motion, then we can second it and talk about it.
I recommend approval of the 2020 compensation.
I'll second for
Purposes of discussion. Okay, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. I guess I understand that this is budgeted. I understand that we have the money there, and I understand that we've had issues in the past with perhaps falling behind with compensation and those types of things. But I think we're also in the midst of a pandemic, a situation where most of the community is suffering. They're either laid off or they've had cuts in pay, and it sends a very difficult message to the taxpayers to say, we understand that you're struggling, but we're going to give our staff a raise anyway. We've had no furloughs. We've had no concerns that way with staff. And I think that in this situation, I'm not opposed to maybe revisiting this later in the year, but I think at this moment, with things barely starting to open up and the situation that we're in right now, this is a very, very difficult thing to give to the taxpayer, to say, hey, look, we don't care that you're struggling. We're still giving our staff a raise. I'm not saying our staff doesn't deserve it, but this current situation that we're in right now is hugely affecting everybody in all areas, and it would be really, really tough to I think.
Ms. Spiros? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Ms. Spiros, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. And I think that I totally agree with what Mr. Witzel said, the sentiment and the words and everything else. There's nothing more that I'd like to do is to give these raises, but I do think that for the reasons stated by Mr. Witzel, that we just cannot do that at this time.
Anybody else?
Barr.
Excuse me. Mr. Barr, I'm sorry, you didn't have your hand high enough. I didn't see. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I clarify that when Jen presented this, she was presenting a 1% adjustment to the scale, and I understand that is being looked at negatively because of what's going on in the community and with COVID-19. Also, as part of what we would normally do on July 1st of each year is allow people who are moving up to the next step of their pay scale to do so. Are you calling that into question, or does that go through as normal for people who would normally advance to the next step in their compensation schedule with a satisfactory performance review?
I don't think there has been any appetite, if you will, for basically stopping the entire pay plan. But now that you mention it, it's an interesting proposition as to whether or not that should go forward. I think the thing that I worry about is that we've been through something, and to some extent we're still going through it. And I think this sends really a wrong message. It's almost like a tone-deaf message that we're giving a raise during this period of time when so many of our citizens are still on unemployment or have not yet been recalled to work. So my thought is that we don't want to dismantle the entire pay plan. We just don't want to add to it. And I think that the people who can, if they've budgeted for moving from one step to another, and it doesn't require any additional appropriation, my instinct is to say, let the pay plan work as it is, but don't add to it. But that's where I'm at right now. I'll yield to other opinions. But Mr. Pascal, would you like to comment on that?
I won't comment on that, but as a counterpoint to what Mr. Witzel said earlier, is that our employees continue to work through the crisis, much as the people who
Could you talk
work in the grocery stores and work.
Okay.
There you go.
The people who worked in the grocery stores, the people who held other essential jobs, all of our people were deemed essential employees. I don't necessarily think that we should punish them by not giving them a raise that was budgeted in our budget for their work.
Thank you. Mr. Witzel? Oh, Mr. Handler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Witzel was absolutely correct. And the chair is that we're going through some extremely difficult situations, and in the city of Marshfield, the number of free meals that have been distributed from some of the high school programs, and knowing at the last utility committee, the delinquency of electrical bills have been very high, 55% more. I just feel very uncomfortable in supporting an effort like this. And my feeling is I'm not going to support it. Thank you.
Without objection, we'll hear from Mr. Bucky, who's come to the podium.
Yeah, I was on that compensation study. I think Mr. Handler was also on there. And again, as much as I want to do this, I agree it's not the right time. I would like to look at the end of the year and see how the economy's doing for the taxpayers in Marshfield, and maybe look at it then.
Mr. Witzel.
Two points are being discussed, and I guess I want to just briefly comment on both. Again, I understand what Mr. Paschal's saying, and I can appreciate that. It's not, yes, there are essential workers that continue to get paid and continue to work full time. Some of those essential workers have gotten a cut in pay. I happen to know of a large group of those individuals that either got a 10 or 15% cut in pay, at least during the time of this. So we're not saying let's give a cut in pay to the staff. And I don't look at it as a punishment, like you're not working hard enough, therefore we're not going to give you a raise. Again, I think it's being sensitive to the current situation around us. I would venture to say there is a small minority of people in the workforce that continue to make the same money they made. I think the majority of people in the community have either suffered significant loss with a complete furlough or layoff, or have suffered at least some level of loss with a partial furlough or a cut in pay. So again, I think that we need to relook at this maybe later in the year and implement that 1% across the board increase. Regarding the other piece, I don't see a problem with people who have done what they need to do to step up into the next spot in the scale. That I can understand. I guess to me that sort of would go along with a promotion of some sort, even though it's technically not, it's just simply moving up in a pay scale. But a 1% blanket across the board raise for every single position, that's more difficult, I think, for the community to understand. So again, I'm going to not support this, but I don't have a problem with increases within bands as people have earned those, and those would be looked at. I think that answers probably Mr. Bark's thought, and that's, again, my own personal opinion. I don't know the rest of the committee's opinion.
Ms. Spiros, you're next, please.
Okay, so for my own benefit, I need a clarification here. So we're talking about the 1% across the board, which it doesn't sound like anyone has an appetite for that. But then we're talking about the pay scale or the steps so if they're eligible for a step up in the scale, they're still getting their step up raise. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
So,
go ahead.
Okay, so in follow-up, I thought that was correct. But so in follow-up, does everybody take their step at the same time? I'm kind of forgetting how this actually worked, or is it with their anniversary? Yes,
Jen would like to answer that, I think. Jen, please answer
Sure.
that for me.
Sure. So just to give you a full scope, so all of the non-represented employees do have a pay adjustment that occurs as of July 1st. So when you're looking at that scenario, it would be the 1% to this pay scale. For our library, for our police, and our fire, they are not affected by this pay scale jump. So they will go by their union contracts or by the library board adjustments. So you're really looking at the remainder of the employees within the city. Just to give you a full ballpark picture, if you're looking at a dollar volume for in terms of what would occur, you're looking at approximately $110,000 is the cost for the 1% adjustment to this scale. So just so you are making your decision with all the information, I want to make sure that you have that. But know that other increases will continue based on union contracts.
I'll ask Steve, when the pay scale was designed, do you remember what the percentage gap between steps was? Do you have a rough idea about what that was?
Jen knows this too, but it depends where you, go ahead, Jen, take it.
Sure. Between steps 1 and 5 in the pay scale, there's a 2.5% adjustment. Between steps 6 through 10, it's a 2%. And between steps 11 and 15, it's a 1.5% adjustment.
And you have any idea how many people are going to be moved? Well, let me get this straight, and correct me if I'm wrong. Even if we've approved the 1%, that would be, it would go to the midpoint on the scale and spread to the out. So it would be basically 1% for the entire scale, roughly, right?
Well, yes, so it applies 1%.
Right, and then, so they would get, so if we had an employee who was moving from one step to another, they would get the 1% plus 2.5% or whatever it was for that pay scale. So we're talking, now the question is, have we anticipated and budgeted those step increases?
Yes.
Thank you. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I mean, that if you remember the pay scale, I don't know if you were here when McGrath did the study, I forget when you stepped off, but you know, a lot of our employees, the majority of our employees are moving through these steps based upon where they were found to be compared to the range. So it's such that a large percentage of our workforce would get steps if, in fact, this were continued on July 1st.
Ms. Spiros.
So with that in mind, I just think, I guess what I am thinking or visualizing in my head as happening is no raises, because I just think that we don't know what's happening with this pandemic. I'm not sure how to word that, steps, not steps, whatever. I'm envisioning no raises because nobody else is giving raises. I mean, I would be hard pressed to think that other companies are going to be giving raises right now in the midst of this pandemic. So I don't know how that looks as far as steps and all that. It doesn't, not steps, whatever. But I guess my thought is that we should not be giving raises right now.
The motion on the floor is to go ahead with a 1% raise on July 1st. And it doesn't have it, and the motion doesn't say anything about the step increases, therefore they would go on as normal, I take it. I think that's what it would be, because the motion on the floor and what they are requesting in the 1% are just two different things. There are two different things that are under discussion here.
Or is that part of the compensation?
It's part of the compensation schedule. What they're talking about, the 1% is changing the compensation schedule. So it would add to it. Is
that right, John?
Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, the 1% would change the steps on the compensation scale.
Right, and so if they move from one step to the other, it would be the 1.5 or 2.5 plus the 1%. Mr. Wetzel.
I guess I'm a little confused now with all this talk of steps and whatnot. It was my understanding, and maybe I'm fully not understanding the compensation scale. It was my understanding that the scale or the steps were not necessarily achieved every single year, but after so many years, you'd make a step up. After so many more years, you make a step up. Is that the way it is, or is it one step per year?
Jen, can you explain that?
Yeah, it is one step per year, and you can choose whether or not you would like to change to implement the scale adjustment that was recommended or budgeted. Obviously, you can make whatever change you would like, but the intent was that everyone would move one step per year. And if you recall, we had done some prior adjustments to deal with the compression issues of the past.
Okay, Mr. Wetzel, carry on.
So that means everybody's getting a raise. Whether we pass the
That's what it
1% or
sounds
not, everybody's getting a raise. It's just how big a raise are they getting?
Mr. Barg?
Not everyone, but the lion's share, certainly. I mean, we have people who, if you remember how this whole thing worked out with McGrath, are already at or very near the top of their scale. Well, they're not proceeding through steps at this point. But, the great majority of our workforce it's based upon a successful performance review. But, Jen's obviously right. It's an annual thing. I sense that the lion's share of the concern right now, and rightfully so, is what's going on with COVID and how people are experiencing this in our community. If it would make sense, perhaps we slot to review this, I don't know whether it's fourth quarter or sometime later in the year and take a look at it then. But I leave it to the discretion of this body, obviously.
Let me make one point. I was here on the council when we lived through the infamous the first compensation plan, which was really controversial. It was a very controversial plan, and we let it go for about 5 years after that it was a Carlson-Detman plan, and after a few years, we found out that our scale was now way out of whack with the market, and basically, I remember about 2017 or 2018, we talked to McGrath, and what I thought the initial plan was to recalibrate our plan to the market. Instead, we came up with a whole different plan, and and I left here before that was initiated, and it's probably a good thing because I think Jen can remember I had a very bad attitude about it. At that time. First of all, I don't remember that everybody automatically moved from step to step in a 1 year increment. I think in the Carlson-Detman plan, it was like 18 months or 2 years, or there were some schedules in it and then breaks in it, if I recall. So this is a little bit different than what I remember. But I think what it might be, I think everybody here is upset that there's going to be some kind of a raise almost for everybody, regardless of that, and you're adding 1% to it. The motion on the floor deals only with the 1%, nothing else. Everything else would go on as normal, and that's what I think we gotta take a vote on and see where that goes. Unless somebody else has something to add to that, Mr. Witzel, did I help you a little bit or not?
Oh, I understand things now, yep.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Steve, do you have anything to add before we call for a vote?
No, I'll just say what I said before. Certainly staff respects what's going on in the community and how people are hurting, and we know that people have been furloughed and laid off and those kind of things. So, like I said, if there's discomfort in moving ahead with any kind of an increase at this point, definitely understand. I would ask that it be potentially reconsidered later in the year as COVID-19 winds down and we see where we're at financially. But, I definitely don't want to see us move backwards in this pay plan. We worked really hard to get a good pay plan a couple of years ago with McGrath. I think it's a good plan. I know you could debate that, but we've been in it a couple of years, and I don't want to find ourselves in 2 or 3 more years doing another pay plan and saying we're already behind again. But I respect your decision.
And I think the one thing, the reason I don't want to mess with the steps at all is because I don't want to trash the pay plan without a real good reason to do so. And I think if we stop or freeze the steps or anything else right at this point, then we'll end up doing exactly what Steve is warning us that might happen, and that is we're going to end up paying another $60,000, $70,000 for a pay plan, which I'm dead set against. Trust me on that one. Okay, is there any more discussion? If not, are you ready for the vote? Okay, all those in favor of the motion to grant the 1%, please say aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. If the motion fails, I assume we'll be seeing this again before the end of the year, Steve. So that, I think your assumption is correct.
Yeah, I mean, if that's a consensus opinion, I don't want to bring something back if you don't want to talk about it, but if you're willing to consider something later in the year and take another look at it based upon conditions in the economy and the community, I'd like to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Wetzel, that's
give it a thumbs up.
Okay, all right. Next up is the, where am I? Number 11, right? Request to recommend approval to execute a 2-year extension of the current contract for assessing services with Grota Appraisals. Mr. Barg, you're on this one.
Thank you. Back in 2017, as Joan Spencer was stepping aside as our full-time staff assessor, we did have a request for proposals for assessing firms to do contract assessing for the city. At that time, we received 4 proposals. We narrowed it down to 2 firms to look at seriously, and we ultimately picked Grota Appraisals, LLC from Menominee Falls. We contracted with them. They've been with us now since the summer of 2017. This contract ends on December 31st of 2020. So later this year, this contract will come to an end. They've been through a lot with us. We've had some changes going on, including we had our appraiser leave in early 2019. We did not refill that position. We looked at some alternatives as to where this is all going to go and how it shakes out. As it is today, we've elevated the former assessment technician, Keith Pugh, to a new position, deputy assessor. He's the lone staff person here, working with Jim Toth, who is our representative from Grota Appraisal. At this point, we're looking at what to do starting in 1/1/21, and we've gotten a proposal from Grota Appraisals. You have it in your packet tonight. Currently, Grota is paid $116,000 a year for their services. Their proposal would go up to $125,000 for 2021, and then another $2,000 to $127,000 for the year 2022. I realize the first year's raise is a bit steep, but that's based on their evaluation of what they're doing now with the new setup and having just one staff person here at City Hall. There's no rhyme, reason, or magic to when we decide to go out for proposals. If you notice, we have gone out recently for proposals in some of our services. And when you're talking about auditing, banking, assessing, these kind of things, it's not like we're required to go out every 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. Some municipalities go a long, long time without bidding out these services if they feel comfortable with the provider. I tend to think that it's a good practice to go out every 5 to 7 years on these services, if for no other reason than to find out what's out there, how competitive it is from a price standpoint and a service standpoint, and those types of things. In this case, with Grota asking for a 2-year extension, that would be 5 years total with them, which I think is reasonable given the circumstances. And as I noted in my staff report, there's really 3 reasons why I'm advocating that we extend with them for another 2 years. One is, again, that we're on our first year with the one staff person only working with Grota, now that our appraiser position was not refilled, and that did save us a lot of money. Secondly, that we are in the middle of a dark store issue. It appears we've gotten through the one with Menards, but we still have a trial coming up later this year with Walmart, and that's taking a considerable amount of time from our assessor and from all involved. And then also we have our largest employer. We've been having some issues with real estate and personal property claims that are taking a lot of time. So you put all this together with the daily work, and I think it maybe is not the greatest time, in my opinion, to switch appraisers or assessors. But if you do decide to go ahead with extending this for 2 years and the council agrees, I would definitely recommend that in the summer of 2022, we do a request for proposals for assessing services. At that point, we'll have had 5 years with Grota. But let me say one more thing before I finish, and that's based on the idea that we stay with contract assessing. The person who is now our deputy city assessor has been growing in the position, has taken classes and training to advance. We really don't know what 2022 will bring. Maybe we want to look at bringing back a staff assessor position as we had with Joan Spencer. Maybe we want to contract with another company. We really don't know what the world will be, but we think that maybe it makes sense to go the next 2 years with Grota, work on what the future might mean for the city of Marshfield, and then do another RFP in 2022. So having said all that, staff's recommendation is to extend the current agreement with Grota Appraisals LLC of Menominee Falls for the years 2021 and 2022.
What are your wishes? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to extend it.
Motion by Mr. Paschal to extend. Is there a second?
I'll second just so we can discuss.
And second again for discussion purposes from Mr. Wetzel. Thank you, sir. Discussion, Mr. Wetzel, well, you made the motion, Mr. Paschal, you get first shot.
I think that Grota's been doing a good job for the city. The explanation Steve provided makes sense to me that we're in the middle of a couple things that they've been working on, and to change horses in the middle of the stream be the best course.
Mr. Wetzel.
I'm on the fence on this one. Couple of reasons. I think that Mr. Barg made some good points, as were reiterated by Mr. Paschal. We're in the midst of some things. It makes sense to continue on at least for a couple more years. I do have some concerns, however, in a couple of things that have happened recently that don't sit so pleasantly with me. I know that every council member received communication via regular mail. Some concerns with maybe lack of follow-up. Further understanding in that situation was that land that was being questioned was never even visually looked at in person, but instead was the value was determined by looking at a map, and that concerns me. If we're paying money and somebody has a dispute, I think it would make sense to have a person physically eyeball the property to make a determination. So that's one thing that's sort of sitting real recently in my mind. It's my understanding also that information that we received on a denial of a request just recently was like an 11th hour, if not even later, kind of a quick, we got to get this done. And it didn't seem as though the company was on top of the decision and or the communicating to the council about that fairly significant issue. So again, there's two black marks in real recent history. I realize that they have done some good things, but it's hard to forget real recent things that are in my mind as we're looking at a contract extension at this point. So again, I'm on the fence. I don't know what to do.
Mr. Handler.
Thank you, Chairperson Wagner. I would agree with Mr. Witzel because I think I heard the same issue that he just explained. And I feel very uncomfortable with that because, people deserve the attention to an issue. That's why we hire these people to do their job. In this case, I think we failed. Thank you.
Ms. Spiros, did you want to join in on that? No, okay. I like Mr. Wetzel, I've heard some of the same complaints, and I've been one of the things that bothers me is if there's a problem with an assessment, the proper forum for it turns out to be the Board of Review. And yet the Board of Review, as anybody who's served on it knows, is operating on the presumption. Basically, it's like the person bringing it's like somebody going to court and bringing the case, and they are guilty until proven innocent. And that's basically the way the Board of Review works. And so basically, to keep those kind of confrontations from happening, there needs to be some desire on the part of the assessor to at least, if they can't accommodate the homeowner or the citizen, then they should at least make them feel comfortable with the decision, make them feel comfortable. They've done everything within the law to make the decision correct, or to give the correct decision, I think is the right way. And the more I've heard about the interaction with this assessor, the more leery I am of extending a contract. I don't know that, I don't know what the alternatives are, because it takes a long time to put together RFPs and do the proper vetting to get somebody else in. I do appreciate that we have until December 31st on this particular contract. But I'm like Mr. Wetzel, I'm torn in two on this thing. In one way, I'd love to go back to our old system, but in the long run, I don't know that there's any way to do that within the 6 months that are left to us. And Mr. Butke is at the podium. Without objection, can Mr. Butke speak? Mr. Butke, you're up.
Thank you. I agree with Mr. Endler, Mr. Witzel, and Mr. Wagner on this. I was not real happy even with the dark store issue. You know, we were talking real tough when the assessor was here, and then lo and behold, we better make a deal with that company. But the last one, where we all got that packet, and I know there's other issues there, but the way it was handled was wrong. I think this gentleman who owns his property's got a good case. And the fact that we don't have somebody going to that property, we got to have that. And if that's what it is to get back in-house assessor, so be it. Now, I was in favor of the contract out, but I can see the reason to have somebody from within. They're going to take the time to go out and look at that property. Thank you.
I think that the thing that I think all three of us have brought up that one packet that we received, and unfortunately, the only legal recourse this guy has, or this homeowner has now, is circuit court. There's absolutely nothing the city council can do to help that person at all. It's basically, it's been through the steps, and that's the last step he's got to go. And that, I don't know how else to mention that, but I would have hoped that it could have been resolved on another level, but it has not been. Anyway, so we have a motion and a second. Mr. Witzel, go ahead.
I guess I'd like to hear from Mr. Barg regarding what we're actually getting. I mean, I understand that there's been some discussion and to have a staff locally within the city that would provide the same services, but and I've heard they're on they're available by phone X number of hours, whatever. I guess I'm wondering, what do we actually get, and how often does anybody from that company set foot into the city limits to do any of the work, actually physically looking at and doing work here versus doing everything remotely? So I'd like the information from Mr. Barg on those.
Mr. Barg,
okay,
handle that?
I'll start with that, and then I'll circle back to make a few comments on some of the things that have been brought up by council during this conversation. The representative from Grota Appraisals is here 1 day a week, the full day. And now during COVID-19, that hasn't necessarily been the case, but normally he's here 1 day a week, which allows them to meet with staff, people who might have concerns. He meets with residents who have questions and concerns. And he does some of what we call fielding, which means goes out and looks at some of the properties. A lot of the fielding as well is done by the in-house person, the deputy city assessor. We can certainly bid this service out, and we have enough time to do that. We're sitting here in May, so it's not like we couldn't do a request for proposals and select somebody, to start 1/1/21. But I think whoever you get, you're going to see something similar from them. You're going to see a service that probably has a similar number of hours spent in the city limits of Marshfield. These companies have a lot of clients, and their basic premise is that they're going to have someone here like that number of hours and then available by phone and email to answer questions during the week as best they can. So I think the level of service is probably pretty similar to what you'll see from other companies making proposals. With respect to some of the things you raised, I'm not going to debate some of the cases. I know you're talking a lot about the one where the packet of information was sent out to the entire council. I just want to say a couple things. Know that there are a number of adjustments made by the assessor prior to the board of review based upon meeting with them, being persuaded that in fact they have a good argument for a reduction. That happens way more than you know. There's other cases where it doesn't, where the homeowner or the property owner walks away dissatisfied and has to decide whether they want to go to the board of review or just let it go. We have, I understand, 4 cases going to the board of review on Thursday this week, and one of them is the person who sent that packet to you. He is making an appeal on Thursday for a reduction in the value of his, I think, roughly 6-acre parcel. And we'll see what happens. Perhaps the board will grant him a reduction on that valuation. The other thing I would just note, as far as the 11th hour thing that was mentioned, that was a case in which I know that the council has some concerns about hearing this late in the process. I know that the mayor did as well. And I don't normally like to have you see that late in the process, but do know that part of it is that the assessor's been trying to work with that property owner for a long time, trying to extract the information necessary to make that final determination as to whether an exemption is warranted. And when that information wasn't forthcoming, despite his numerous attempts, he ultimately had to make a decision on whether or not to grant the exemption. But a lot of that time that he might have been thinking he should have been communicating with the council and maybe making a decision earlier was time in which he was trying to get the information necessary to really make a final determination. And when he didn't get it, that in part led to his decision to deny the request.
Any further discussion? The motion on the floor is to grant the 2-year extension. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Can you raise
Ms.
your
Spiros?
hand?
How did you vote?
I'm sorry, what?
How did you vote?
No.
Okay. Mr.
No, I don't need it. You wanted to know hands. That was my.
Spiros, Witzel, Hendler? All no? And Mr. Wagner?
No.
4 noes?
And basically, I think we better be prepared to bring this back with some, Steve, in our next meeting, can you bring us back some other options of what to do, what we might want to do? Otherwise, it could be, well, I'm not going to lay out the options. I will trust your expertise to that.
Well, yeah, and I could just say now the basic options will be a request for proposal from other companies and looking at in-house assessing. And yeah, we'll definitely come back to you as soon as we can to have that discussion.
Thank you very much. Items for the next agenda. Anybody? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Wetzel, second by Hendler. We stand adjourned.